The previous class, what we really discussed was a major revolution in uh, the transmission process of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, right? From the times we received the Torah uh, at Mount Sinai, it was always passed down orally from one generation to another, right? Not just from one generation, but from one court or from one president of the court with his court to the next generation of Supreme Court justices. This went on until after the destruction of the temple, um, where Rabbi Akiva and his students started a project of recording uh, all the oral traditions in all the ways that we can connect the oral traditions to the script, right? And they started recording them and writing it down. The truth is, they've always been recording. There's always been people writing their own notes. But what happened now with the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he saw in the middle of all these persecutions that we're going through, we had this time of relative peace that he took advantage of to collect everybody's works, especially those of Rabbi Akiva and his students, who really started to organize it. And he organized it all and published it in a book. Up until now, even if somebody had written records for himself or notes for himself, they would never teach from those notes or from those records, but always teach orally, in their own words. But now, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who put the Mishnah together, he put it together for the purpose of everybody having one oral text to study from, to relate to. And this is to be studied off by heart, to be recited by all the students. And when all the other Hachamim, and we spoke how previously there was big controversy about it, big debate, not all the Hachamim agreed with Rabbi Akiva and with the students on recording the oral traditions in writing. But after the Mishnah was published, and everybody saw what great value there was to it, it was widely accepted by all the Chachamim. And that is the key, that it was accepted and that it spread out. Because that is always what gives anything in Jewish law authority. Even the Torah itself, when received by Moshe, the reason why it has any authority over us is not because some sort of mysterious being that lives in the skies came down and said, you got to do this and you got to do that. But because we freely entered a contract with God and accepted upon ourselves nationally the terms of the covenant. And that's also the same basis for the authority of the Mishnah. Once the Mishnah was published and it was widely accepted by all the Chachamim in the generation, that's what gives the Mishnah its authority. And this is one major stepping stone in the evolution of the Torah Shebe'al Peh, the oral law. The first time there is an actual text that has authority representing the oral law. Up until now, the only text was the written law. And same way that oral traditions weren't meant to be written down, textual traditions or the text of the Torah, it's forbidden to have a public reading of it off by heart. It also needs to be from a scroll, properly read. But now all this has changed. And it was accepted by the court, and it was accepted by all of the Hachamim at the time, and it spread out to everywhere, to all over the land of Israel. and eventually also all over the diaspora. And so now we are entering the post-Mishnah era. This is a completely new era in Jewish history. The era in which we now rely on texts for our oral traditions. All right, so here, and all the Hachamim that are mentioned from the times of the men of the Great Assembly, meaning from Ezra Sofer, who came back after the first destruction, right, and Shimon HaTzadik, all the way till the publication of the Mishnah, all these Chachamim are referred to as Tannaim. And all the Chachamim that come now until the publication of the Talmud are referred to as Amoraim. It's a different era, right? The Tannaim are all those mentioned in the Mishnah, so the Tannaim are the ones mentioned in the Mishnah. The Amoraim are the ones that come afterwards until the sealing of the Talmud, which is what this section that we are starting now ends with. And we will now learn what was the process of writing the Talmud. How did it develop from the Mishnah? All right? So, we're back to the Mishneh Torah, Maimonides, in his introduction to the Mishneh Torah. ואלו הם גדולי החכמים שהיו בבית דינו של רבנו הקדוש וקיבלו ממנו. All right, so the era of the Tannaim ends with the publication of the Mishnah. That was done by Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He compiled it, and these are the other prominent Chachamim that were part of his court and received Torah from Rabbeinu HaKadosh, meaning the next generation of Chachamim who received the traditions and the oral Torah directly from Rabbeinu HaKadosh as the president of the Supreme Court. So, Shimon v'Gamliel banav, all right, remember Rabbeinu HaKadosh's lineage. Anyone remember who his father and grandfather and great-grandfather were? So Rabbeinu HaKadosh comes from Hillel HaZaken, right? And Hillel's son was Shimon, and his son was Gamliel, and his son was Shimon, and his son was Gamliel, and his son was Shimon, until we get to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, which is Rabbeinu HaKadosh. And now his sons are Shimon and Gamliel, right? He has two sons, Shimon and Gamliel. Rabbi Afes, right? These are other Chachamim, not his sons, who were in his court. So Shimon and Gamliel were his students and his sons. And besides them, there was Rabbi Afes, Rabbi Hananiah ben Hama, Rabbi Hiya. Rabbi Hiya is an important one. We'll learn more about him. He has one of the most important writings that are post-Mishnah. And Rav and Shemuel, right? These are two of his students who became heads of the yeshivot in Bavel, meaning they eventually left Eretz Israel. They were the students of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi in the land of Israel, and eventually they went to Bavel, and each became heads of the yeshivot in Bavel, in Babylon. All right, Rabbi Yanai, Ubar Kapara, right, Vishmuel, and Rabbi Yohanan is also an important one, and Rabbi Hoshaya is also one of the more prominent ones. These are the top of the Hachamim who received from Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, right? Obviously, there was an entire court, and there were many other students at the time, especially at a time of relative peace. Rabbeinu HaKadosh is assumed to have had many, many students. And among them, there are thousands and tens of thousands of other Hachamim at the time of Rabbeinu HaKadosh who received Torah from Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Sorry, somebody wanted to ask something?
Yeah, Rabbeinu HaKadosh is Yehuda HaNasi.
Right. Also known as Rebbe, just without without even mentioning his name. Rabbi or Rabbeinu HaKadosh or Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, they're all the same person.
Okay, thank you.
אף על פי שאלו ה-11 קיבלו מרבנו הקדוש, right? Even though that all these 11 that were mentioned previously received directly from Rabbeinu HaKadosh, ועמדו במדרשו, right? And they stood in his court. They were also members of the Supreme Court. Rabbi Yohanan Katan Haya, right? Rabbi Yohanan, we mentioned over here, he was one of the youngest of the students. He was very, very young. ואחר כך היה תלמיד לרב ינאי, right? And he was also a student of Rav Yanai, one of the students of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So he was kind of like almost the next generation of students. At the end of the times of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, he started, his training in the yeshiva. And eventually Rabbi Yanai took over after Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and he studied also under Rabbi Yanai. And also Rabbi Oshaya, as we'll see later on. He also studied from Rabbi Oshaya. All right, so Rabbi Yohanani was young, and he received his traditions probably primarily from Rabbi Yanai, the student of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. וכן רב קיבל מרבי ינאי, ושמואל קיבל מרבי חנניה בן חמה. All right? And besides them, there's also Rav over here and Shemuel. They were also young, and they received from also the more senior students of Rabbeinu HaKadosh as well. So he had like a generation and a half of students. And he had students who trained his younger students as well. Yarad Rav leBavel besof yemei Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Towards the end of Rabbeinu HaKadosh's life, Rav, right? We mentioned over here, Rav, he went to Bavel. And this is in the year 3979. Umatzah beBavel Rav Shila, right? And he went to the yeshiva in Bavel. And over there, the head of the yeshiva, or we call it the yeshiva, is like the court. It's a more local court. It doesn't have the same authorities as the Supreme Court back in Jerusalem or in Eretz Israel. However, it became the capital of Judaism basically after, like from now and on. All right, so in Bavel, there was Rav Shila. והיה רב ענב מאוד, and he was very, very humble, Rav, right? So he comes, he's considered to be one of the greatest of the Chachamim, received Torah directly from Rabbeinu HaKadosh and his student. So obviously they wanted to put him as the head of the court. Who else is more qualified to be the Rosh Yeshiva? But he was very, very humble. ולא רצה להימנות ראש ישיבה כל ימי רב שילה עד שנפטר. Right? And he didn't want to take the position, or he didn't want to take Rav Shila's position, like replace him, until after he passed away. He says, "I'll wait till Rav Shila finishes his term. He's passes away. I'm not taking his place." Only after he passed away, he accepted the position of being the head of the yeshiva. Ve'od, in addition to not accepting the position, lo rasa liyot lerosh b'nehar de'ah b'mkomo shel Shemuel. Right? We said Shemuel was also one of the students of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, or Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and he also already made his way to Bavel, and he was appointed the head of one of the other main yeshivot in Nehar De'ah. Nehar De'ah is the name of the city. Most of these cities, they sit on the delta of the Tigris and the Euphrates, right? So they all have names like Nehar De'ah. Nehar De'ah means like a great river. Or Pompedita. Pompedita means the delta of the river is really where they both meet. That's where Pompedita was. So these are the big cities over there, the major cities. That's where they had the main yeshivot. They were mostly around or very close to the big rivers. All right, so Shmuel was already there. He was in the Haradah. He was the head of the yeshiva there. Rav, he wasn't going to replace Shmuel, and he wasn't going to replace Rav Shila until after Rav Shila would pass away. So he went to Surah. He went to a different area in Bavel. He Mata Mahasya, right? That's the name of the city, either Mata Mahasya or Surah. Vaya Sham Lerosh. Ad Sheniftar Bishnat Arbat Arafim V'Gimel. Right, and he was the head of the yeshiva over there until he passed away, year 4003. Ubau b'nei yeshivato l'Shmuel. All right, and then after he passed away, his students went to Shemuel. V'niftar Shemuel daled alafim asara, and he passed away 7 years later, year 4010. V'aya hacham gadol b'kol chokhmat yevanit Musif al Torato, right? And Rav, we said, he was a student of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. We said Rabbeinu HaKadosh he was extremely great. He was very rich, very wealthy. He was extremely well versed in all sciences, right? And Rav, his student, was like him. Also, it says Chokhmat Yevanit. It's talking about Greek philosophy. He was a great philosopher, as well as all his knowledge in Torah. Right? Philosophy back then is comparable to science today, meaning he was a great scientist as well. As a matter of fact, Shemuel too. Shemuel is said about him in the Talmud that he knew the pathways of the skies better than the streets of his city. All right. Now he lived in a big city, Shemuel. I actually never. I always said, no, there's no way this is for real. This has to be an exaggeration. Until one of my best friends, his name is Shemuel. Also, he's also an astronomer. He really loves astronomy. And after 20 years of living in Ranana together, he'd sometimes get lost because he didn't remember which were the main streets. And then I said, you know what? You must be just like Shemuel from the Talmud. Now, for the first time, I understand how someone could be so deep into his astronomy, know the pathways of the skies, yet the own streets of the city that he lives in, he could sometimes get confused and mixed up. All right? So both Rav and Shemuel, the students of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, they were, aside from being top students of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, knowing the traditions well, knowing how to make Pesak Halacha well, knowing how to lead a community well, they were also very well versed in all sciences. Shemuel especially in, Shemuel especially in astronomy, and Rav especially in philosophy, in Greek philosophy. Ve'eluhem talmidehem, and these are their students. All right, Rav Yehuda, we're just going to go through the names mostly. Verami bar Yehezkel, you don't have to remember these names. Verav Hama bar Yehezkel, Verav Nachman Hanasi, Verabba bar Abua, he's also relatively well-known one. Verav Sheshat, Rav Sheshat is also quoted a lot in the Talmud. V'Sagina Horaya. Rav Sheshat, he was also blind. Sagina Hor in Aramaic literally means lots of light. It's kind of like a nice way to say negative things. They say they actually call it Leshon Sagina Hor, which basically means the opposite. So it says a lot of light, it's because he doesn't see anything. Verav Anan, Verav Matana, Verav Shimi Barashe, Verav Hiya Barashe, Verav Yitzhak Barashian, Verav Hama Bar Guria, Verav Kahana Harishon. All right, so these are their main students. A lot of them are mentioned a lot in the Talmud. Ubiyimehem haya rosh be'eretz Yisrael Rabbi Yohanan. All right. And during the times of Rav and Shemuel and their students in Bavel, the head of the yeshiva or the head of the Supreme Court back in Eretz Israel was Rabbi Yohanan. Rabbi Yohanan, we mentioned earlier, as he was one of the youngest of the Talmidim of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and he received from Rabbi Yanai, and over here we see also received this Torah from Rabbi Oshaya, Birbi. V'he'erich yamim, and he had a long life. Ki shemonim shana haya rosh yeshiva. He was head of the court. He was the Supreme Justice, the president of the Supreme Court for 80 years. Vehu hiber Talmud Yerushalmi lehamisha sedarim. Right? So the more prevalent Talmud is the Talmud Bavli, which was published in Bavel years later. There's also the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Talmud, or what they call the Palestinian Talmud, or the Jerusalem Talmud. This was actually written not long after the Mishnah, the publication of the Mishnah. And so it's also considered to be like many of the other, call it Emoraic literature, which we see there's other things written by Rav and Shemuel and other of the students of Rabbeinu Kadosh. But the biggest one is the Talmud Yerushalmi. All right, and the Talmud Yerushalmi is focused on, I mean, all the Talmud, both Talmudim, they're based on the Mishnah. And the Mishnah has 6 sections to it. And the Talmud Yerushalmi has 5 sections. Ki en miseder taharot rak masechet nida. Right? Because out of the 6th volume is Seder Taharot, things to do with purity and impurity. All we have from that is Masechet Nida. I'll go a little bit more into it. Basically, the Mishnah is made up of 6 volumes. Each volume is divided into different masechtot. That's what it's called, tractates. All right. So the first volume is called Seder. What's it called again? Seder Ziraim. Ziraim. All right. Seder Ziraim is the first. Ziraim means seeds. Most of Seder Ziraim talks about laws that have to do with the land itself, land of it, and since most of it also has to do with the land of Israel, like Masechet Pe'ah, right? Masechet Demai. There's a lot of things that are irrelevant in the Galut because it has to do with things to do with Shemitah, which only take place in the land of Israel. So in the Talmud Bavli, we only have the first tractate out of that whole volume, meaning they only wrote about that first tractate, which is Masechet Berachot. Masechet Berachot has everything to do with Kiryat Shema, with the Birkat HaMazon, and the Berachot that we need to say, every day, pretty much. All right? Seder, so the last volume of the Mishnah is called Seder Taharot, which has a lot to do with purity and impurity. And so Rabbi Yohanan, when he came to write the Talmud, so out of the last volume, he only wrote the Talmud for Masechet Nida, because that's relevant always and everywhere. וחיבר הירושלמי בקרוב מ-200 שנה אחר החורבן. And he wrote this Talmud Yerushalmi. It was about 200 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. Okay. Any questions? We didn't really get into the structure of the Mishnah up until now. Okay, so we will continue. In parallel to what was going on in Eretz Israel, right? There's this new institution that kind of developed and evolved, and it's it's quite astonishing, and it's very interesting what happened here. All right, so we have the Supreme Court, and we have the yeshivot, and this is also why the yeshivot in Bavel became so prominent. It's because of this new institution that started to develop called the Yerhei Kallah. Yerhei Kallah. Can anyone guess what that means?
I mean, Kallah is bride, right?
Right, Kallah is bride.
Yeah.
New marriage.
What is Yerhei?
Like the smell of or
Moon.
Moons, right? Not smell, not from the word reach, but from the word yareach. Yerhei Kallah literally means like the how do you call it? The bride's moons. I don't know if that's really the meaning of the word Kallah, because it really has nothing to do with brides over here. But maybe what they're trying to allude to is something similar to like in Har Sinai, where we compare Har Sinai to being like the wedding between the Jewish people and God. So maybe that's why they refer to this as Yerhei Kallah. And we'll see what this Yerhei Kallah is. All right, this is first recorded it's called Mishnah Rabbi Natan. I rarely bring sources here that are not directly either from Maimonides, Sevra Kabbalah, or Rav Shirira Gaon. This is Rabbi Natan Habavli. He also wrote kind of like something similar to the Mishnah. And this is ancient. We're talking about around the times of Rabbi Akiva. All right, but he lived in Bavel. And he's describing something that is taking place in Babylon. ומתקבצין ובאים מכל המקומות בחודש Kallah. He says, and everybody gathers from everywhere during the month of Kallah. שהוא חודש אלול בימי הקיץ ואדר בימי החורף. Right, which is the month. There's 2 months that they call the months of the Kallah, and that is the month of Elul. Right, Elul is the last month, right before the Chagim, right before Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, and everything. And Adar is the last month before Nisan. Right, it's the last month of the year before Nisan, when we have Pesach and go into Shavuot and everything. Right, so in these 2 last months before the Hagim, basically everyone goes on vacation. Everyone's on vacation, and they gather in the yeshivot. They come to the yeshivot, right? וכל אחד ואחד מן התלמידים במקומו גורס ומעיין כל אותם 5 חודשים המסכתה שאמר להם ראש הישיבה בסתם מעמו. So we have 5 months, right, where everybody is, going around their life. They're in their yeshivot, or they're doing business, or doing whatever it is, and then they have a 1-month break from that, and during that month, they go to the yeshiva. So during those 5 months, everyone is studying and focusing their studies on one specific tractate of the Mishnah. All right? So they're in the yeshiva, and the Rosh Yeshiva, let's say, is Rav now. And Rav says, so this is in the Yerach Kallah, and he says, the next time we meet here, right, the next Yerach Kallah, which is going to be in Elul, we are going to be discussing Masechet Berachot. So now all the students at the end of the Yerach Kallah, they go home. They have 5 months to prepare Masechet Berachot. and they go and they study Masechet, they study the Mishnah, they study, maybe they discuss it with their friends, or other Talmudim of the yeshivot, and they maybe look for any other commentaries or any other written material that might be regarding Masechet Berachot. And then the month of Elul, they all gather in the main yeshiva, and now they spend an entire month discussing all the laws and all the Mishnayot of Masechet Berachot. ובאדר אומר להם מסכת פלונית נפרש באלול. All right, so in Adar he says, when you guys come back in Elul, we will be discussing Masechet Berachot. And then they're there in Masechet, studying Masechet Berachot. They come back in Elul and they're explaining everyone in the yeshiva and discussing formally Masechet Berachot. And then the Rosh Yeshiva says, when you come back in Adar, we'll be studying Masechet Shabbat. You have 5 months to prepare. Right? וכמו מסכת פלונית נגרוס באדר. ובאים כולם ויושבים לפני ראשי הישיבות באדר ובאלול. All right? And so they go for 5 months and they study their Masechet, the one Masechet that everybody's studying now. And then they come back and they sit before the heads of the yeshivot in the main yeshivot, and they discuss that Masechet. Twice a year, this takes place for an entire month. By the way, this is the source of the vacations that the yeshivot take till today. Till today, the big yeshivot, or all the yeshivot, their schedule is, it's called Zman Elul, right? Or it's called Ben Hazmanim, in between the times of their periods of study. And in Adar, really it's been pushed off, right? So Zman Elul is a small period of studying, because then there's Nisan and they're all on vacation. And same goes with Adar, Elul and Tishrei, and then Adar and Nisan. ומתקבסין שתי פעמים בשנה, and so twice a year everybody gathers, and this is an extremely important point to emphasize, because what made the Talmud and the Mishnah so authoritative is that everybody gathered. They were gathered in one place, in one location, to discuss. And so whatever's written in the Talmud is a reflection of these discussions, of the gatherings of the Hachamim from all over. And they weren't just gathering from Bavel. They were gathering from anywhere that people could come to Bavel from. And you had thousands and tens of thousands of people gathering during these 2 months. Ba'adar u'be'elul mikol ha'mekomot, from everywhere they would come. V'nos'in v'notenin b'milchamta shel Torah, right? And they would have their discussions and their disputes, all right? It's called milchamta shel Torah, in the war of Torah, meaning everyone is defending their position and challenging the other person's position, and they're really sharpening each other's, intellectually. Ad shema'amidin davar al buryo v'halacha la'amita, right? Until they get to the bottom of each halacha, each new situation that comes up. What are we going to make pesak on? And they get to the bottom of it, the truth of the matter. Halacha la'amita, umeve'in ra'aya min hamikra, umin hamishna, umin ha-talmud. Right? And when they do this, they all have to support their positions by bringing proofs, either from the text itself, scripture, the Torah, or the Tanakh, umin ha-mishnah, they bring it from the Mishnah, and from any of the materials that were already written and available to them at that time. Right? So the Chachamim, they started this they started this. Was this idea, this we'll call it this decree that every year we're going to be studying two masechtot, right? One masechet every 6 months. So two masechtot a year. Hen haser, hen yater, right? Whether it be a big masechet like Shabbat or a small masechet like Ta'anit, right? It doesn't matter. Whether it's a big masechet or a small masechet, every 6 months they're going to be studying and discussing an entire masechet, regardless of its size. כדי לגמור כל התלמוד ב-30 שנה.
Can I
And
ask you
this
something?
way, they complete an entire cycle of the Talmud or of the Mishnah in 30 years, meaning there's roughly 60 masechtot, 60 tractates of the Mishnah.
Okay.
Michaela, you had a question?
No, I was just wondering, maybe I missed it, but I was just wondering what hard word. Masechet.
Masechet.
No?
Yeah, so again,
Masechet.
Masechet is, that's what Masechet?
Yeah, tractate.
Yeah, so
I
Masechet
think
tractate. The Mishnah, the Mishnah is very big. It's 6 volumes. Each volume is called a seder. And each volume, seder, is divided into masechtot. Right? So a masechet is basically, it's all the Mishnayot regarding a certain topic. So you have a masechet called Shabbat. You have a masechet called Yom Tov. Right? You have a masechet called Avodah Zarah. You have a masechet called Berachot. And each one of those masechtot, or those tractates, are divided into chapters. You have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and each one of those chapters are divided into halachot, which today most people refer to them as mishnayot, right? One individual mishnah. It's really should be called halacha, right? Halachot. So many halachot, make up a chapter, a perek.
Was these the ones that I think it's the is it the big work that the Rambam did? No? Am I mistaken?
Again?
So is this the like the big work that the Rambam did? Because he did a precursor, which was the Book of Mitzvot, and then he did
he did something similar, and he actually calls it
Mishnah,
Torah, which its name kind of alludes to the Mishnah itself. So he did something similar.
Okay.
He has 14 volumes, each volume divided into, they call it a hativa, which is the Hilchot Shabbat. It's similar, it's organized differently, but the structure, I guess you could say, is kind of the same. Okay. And each one of those, right, like Hilchot Shabbat is divided into chapters. And each one of those chapters is divided into halachot as well. So it's kind of like the same structure. It's just organized a bit differently.
Okay.
But what we're referring to here is the Mishnah itself.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So when the Rosh Yeshiva says in the next Yerach Kallah, whether it be Adar or Elul, we're studying a Masechet, what he's saying is we'll be studying one tractate of the Mishnah. Prepare it for the next 5 months. And on the 6th month, when we regather and reassemble here in the yeshiva, this is what we will be discussing. All right, now this kind of started to develop like independently. This goes back already to the times of Rabbi Akiva. All right, here I wrote a footnote, right? Rabbi Natan Bavli was describing this. He was in the generation of Rabbi Akiva, about the year 3900, and it seems that this custom, continued until the times of Rav Hayeh Gaon, which is the son of Rav Shira Gaon, who was describing what used to be, but it was still going on. It wasn't as we'll get to that, how that sort of came to an end later. But this has been going on for at least 900 years. So for 900 years, there's times where, it was more, it was more of a big event than others. There were certain periods. But the times of the Talmud, up until the Talmud was published, from the times of the Mishnah to the time that the Talmud was published, this has been a main event in Bavel. And to the point we see thousands and tens of thousands of people would assemble at the yeshivot twice a year. You see, Rabbah, one of the later of the Chachamim of the Talmud, he had 12,000 students. How do you have 12,000 students? So we see, thousands and thousands of people assembled at these yeshivot twice a year for an entire month. So now imagine, right? You're not one of the top students of the yeshiva, but you're a great businessman. Where are you going to be in the month of Adar and in the month of Elul? So everybody would come to the yeshivot. You have the students who come for their studies, and then you have thousands and thousands of the Jewish people assembling in the yeshivot. So you have also all of the, everybody who has any product to sell. That's where they're going to be, and that's what made the yeshivot of Bavel the Jewish capital of the world, right? For a while it was New York. That's where all the Jews were. And for a while it was, in Berlin, right? So this is how the capital of Judaism moved from Jerusalem, right? After the destruction of the Second Temple and the publication of the Mishnah, after the persecutions against the Jewish people were renewed in the land of Israel. And it was a time of relative peace for the Jews in Bavel, so much that they had a capital city in Babylon, where they can assemble tens of thousands of them twice a year at the yeshivot. All right. Any questions? Any clarifications before we move on? Although it's kind of starting a new topic.
And today there is nothing there, anything like left from that time, or there in Babylon?
Well,
No.
there's remnants of that place. I remember when America started bombing Iraq, and then they sent in ground troops, and they started conquering one area and another. All of a sudden, all these names of places that are mentioned in the Talmud are being mentioned in the news. But as a center or capital of the Jewish people, there's nothing left there anymore. I don't even know how many Jews are left in Iraq.
Thank you.
From there, and this is what we're going to learn more towards the end, the new capital that replaced Babylon was in Spain. And actually transferred from Babylon to Spain. And we'll see how that happened in one of the later classes. We'll get to that eventually. All right. Anything else? Okay. By the way, this concept of the Yerhei Kallah, for some reason, most people aren't really even aware of it. And in my opinion, this is maybe one of the foundations of the Talmud. Without the Yerhei Kallah, we would have no Talmud. Without this developing in Babylon, and it's on the one hand, it's what made Babylon, the capital city of the Jewish people, or the yeshivot in Bavel, the capital and the center of Judaism for many, many years. But it's also, this is the key to the formulation of the Talmud. This is how it happened. The Talmud is basically recordings of these discussions that took place over these many years that the Chachamim would gather in the yeshivot and discuss. Otherwise, the Talmud itself wouldn't really have too much validity if it didn't represent the discussions of all of the Chachamim.
For me, I would like to ask, was it the time there was no prophet anymore in that time?
Right. But prophecy has already ended at the beginning, kind of at the beginning of the second temple. Right? The last prophets was like Ezra.
Uh-huh.
So we're already quite a long time without any prophecy at this point.
Okay, Haval.
Yeah. Well, Be'ezat Hashem, it'll come back hopefully soon.
Can I just ask you something? What is the root word for Kallah? Because I was thinking you
Sorry,
mentioned
what is
the root word? What is the root word for Kallah? What does that word come from? Because you said that it was used also at Mount Zion. Was it called
right?
Hasina?
Yeah. Okay. So, like for instance, on Shavuot, I don't know if everyone has this this custom, but at least the Moroccans, we have a custom that we read a ketubah. Right, a ketubah is like the contract between a man, a groom, and the bride, because we view the acceptance of the Torah and entering a covenant with God as like a wedding, as a wedding and entering a covenant between a groom and a bride. So Yirhei Kallah literally means the months of the bride.
Is that because you received something? Because we received from Mount Zion, and
so
also in
what was
Shavuot.
so significant about Ma'aman Har Sinai, that revelation on Har Sinai?
I'm sorry?
What was so significant? Meaning, as opposed to, let's say, the prophecy of Muhammad, right?
Because
prophecy of Muhammad took place with one person.
Yeah.
What was so
spoke
significant?
to millions.
Right. So it was an assembly of the entire nation. So I think that's what the Chachamim are modeling it after. When they call this institution Yirhei Kallah, the months of the bride, it's because it's during these 2 months where the entire nation, so to speak, or whoever can from the entire nation, is assembling in the yeshivot, kind of like renewing the vows. It says we're putting everything aside now, and we're coming to focus on studying Torah for an entire month, twice a year.
Okay.
I will see also. It's interesting. Later on, there's a story about 4 Hachamim that they're traveling from Bavel, and they're traveling all around the Mediterranean to gather funds, to raise funds. And it says, "Le'achnasat Kallah." They're going to raise funds for the Kallah. And most people interpret that as what we call today, achnasat Kallah. If you see beggars on the street saying achnasat Kallah, it's because they have a wedding to fund, right? Maybe one of their kids is getting married and they have no money. And so they say achnasat Kallah. And so you give them some charity. But then you think, why are 4 top Chachamim of the yeshivot in Bavel traveling all around the Middle East to raise money for a wedding? Doesn't make any sense. But when you understand what's going on in Bavel, it says they're raising money to fund these Yerchei Kallah. Let's see if you all remember this when we get to that story, because it's actually part of the course. It's a later part of the course. I think maybe we'll stop here and not start a new topic. What's most important for me, for you guys to remember from this class is what is the Yerchei Kallah. And I think also, like most people studying in yeshivot, even 20, 30 years, they may have heard it mentioned once or twice. I don't know how many of them really understand its significance to the evolution and development of the Torah Shebe'al Peh, and especially the Talmud.